Matthew. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its risings and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
You've been working hard today. Time for a little break, a little rest. So at the end of January, we will have the next of our quarterly Ask the Minister Sundays. Those days when instead of my offering you a message to ponder. You give biblical and theological and spiritual and sometimes personal questions for me to ponder. But fair is fair. And so today it's your turn. I have 3 questions for you to start off with. And they're so hard. First question. How many Gospels are there? 4. Okay. Maybe it wasn't that hard. 4 Gospels, yes. Question number 2. Of those 4 Gospels, how many offer us a Christmas story? 2. Very good. Wow. Should have known I wouldn't sneak anything by you. Question number 3. Last question. Okay. Which 2 are they? Matthew and? Yes, Matthew and Luke. Very good. Yeah, Matthew and Luke are the only Gospels that give us a Christmas story. But the thing is, as we discussed at the December Shell Point men's lunch, despite the fact that nearly, if not every Christmas pageant that you have ever seen or been a part of mashes those 2 stories together, they are actually quite different from each other. Let's take Luke's Gospel, Luke's Christmas story. In Luke's Christmas story, first of all, Luke's Christmas story is quite lengthy. In Luke's Christmas story, the focal character, after Jesus, of course, is Mary. In Luke's Christmas story, on the night Jesus is born, an angel choir, much like this one, shows up and sings. In Luke's Christmas story, the first people that we are told go to see Jesus and Mary and Joseph are shepherds. Okay? That's Luke's Gospel, Luke's Christmas story. But in Matthew's Christmas story, first of all, Matthew's Christmas story is a fair amount shorter than Luke's. In Matthew's Christmas story, the focal character after Jesus is Joseph. In Matthew's Christmas story, there are no shepherds, there are no angels. In Matthew's Christmas story, the first people to go and see Jesus and Mary and Joseph are wise men. Not shepherds, wise men, or magi, believed by scholars to probably have been astrologers who served royal courts, astrologers from the Near East, probably from places like Persia and Babylon. And unlike in Luke's Gospel, where the shepherds see Jesus on that first night, the implication of Matthew's Christmas story is they don't. It's a little bit later. So, 2 very different Christmas stories. Oh, and there's one other notable difference between the 2. In Luke's Christmas story, Mary ponders, deeply reflects. Mary ponders a lot in Luke's Christmas story. We're told, for instance, that Mary ponders Gabriel's greeting to her when he shows up out of nowhere to tell her that she is going to be the mother of Jesus, when he tells her that she is favored and that the Lord is with her. Okay? We're told that Mary ponders what kind of greeting that might be. And then, on the night Jesus is born, we are told again that Mary ponders. She ponders the story that the shepherds tell her about the angels that came to announce Jesus' birth and to tell them to get on over there quickly to see the child. she ponders that as well. In Luke, Mary ponders. But in Matthew, there's no pondering. Mary doesn't ponder. And to borrow Mary's words from Luke's gospel, in response to the angel Gabriel then telling her who and what her kid is going to become, how can this be? How can this be that Mary doesn't ponder in Matthew's gospel, in Matthew's Christmas story? Seems to me there was plenty to ponder about. How can this be that Mary doesn't ponder, for instance, over why Joseph chooses to stay with her in the midst of those wild circumstances like we talked about last Sunday? And certainly, how can it be that Mary doesn't ponder those strangers that show up out of nowhere from the Far East after her child is born? How can this be that Mary doesn't ponder what in God's name they're doing there? How can it be that Mary doesn't ponder their fancy clothes? And perhaps most of all, how can it be that Mary doesn't ponder the ridiculously lavish, extravagant, and valuable gifts that those strangers bring to her in honor of that child? Because those gifts were expensive. That was some valuable stuff right there, especially in that time and place. Gold. Well, gold's still pretty valuable. Frankincense. Frankincense. An aromatic resin that was of great value in that time and place and well before. Frankincense had been traded in the Near and Far East for at least 2,000 years before Jesus was born. And then myrrh. Okay, nobody knows what myrrh is. Apparently myrrh is a yellow to reddish brown tree sap that had both aromatic and medicinal properties. Okay? How can it be that Mary doesn't ponder all of that? But especially those ridiculously lavish, extravagant, valuable gifts that those strangers bring to her in honor of her child. How could she not have pondered that? Especially because she doesn't know. Where's Henry? Oh, there's Henry. Okay. If you were here last Sunday for either the 10 a.m. or the Christmas Eve service, you heard Henry sing that song, Mary, Did You Know? Mary, did you know that your baby boy, okay, would one day walk on water, one day save our sons and daughters? Well, in Matthew's gospel, Mary doesn't know. Mary doesn't know any of that. She has not been told who and what her kid is going to become. She doesn't know. And so I can't believe she didn't ponder all of it, especially those ridiculously lavish, extravagant, valuable gifts. And in the midst of her pondering, I also find it hard to believe that at one point she didn't think, we don't deserve this. No one deserves this. It, to me at least, would have been a perfectly fitting, a perfectly appropriate thing for Mary to ponder. just as now it seems to me that it is also a perfectly appropriate thing for us to ponder. To ponder now when it comes to the ridiculously lavish, extravagant, valuable gift that we have been given in and through the Christmas story. My guess is that each and every one of us at some point in our lives has received that type of gift. That type of gift, whether it's at Christmas or some other time, whether it was material or not. The kind of gift that made us ponder, we don't deserve this. No one does. I also don't know about you. I mean, I know I have. I have received that kind of gift more than once. But I don't think I have ever thought about that. I have ever had that thought, I don't deserve this, when it comes to Christmas. I have experienced joy at Christmas time after time after time, certainly this Christmas. I have experienced peace time after time after time at Christmas. I have experienced gratitude time after time after time at Christmas. But I'm not sure I have ever considered at Christmas the idea that I don't deserve the gift that God gives us, or that no one does. But I don't think we do. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I don't mean that in the sense of, oh my God, we don't deserve that gift because we're such lowly, poor, miserable, helpless, worthless people. Not at all. I actually take very seriously the claim in the first creation story that God created us in God's image and likeness. So we're not so bad. Okay? I don't mean it that way. I mean it in the sense that the gift that God gives us at Christmas is so wildly, ridiculously extravagant and lavish and valuable, so life and world changing if we choose to receive it and make the most of it, that how is it possible for any of us to really deserve that? To really deserve that. But God does it anyway. God did it anyway. Because that's God's love, isn't it? God's unconditional, selfless love. God's hesed, God's agape, as we also explored last Sunday. And that's God's grace, isn't it? God's unmerited, undeserved favor and blessing upon us in the language of Christian theology. That is the spiritual truth, and it can be a hard spiritual truth that I think Christmas calls us to also ponder. That we don't deserve it, but God did it anyway. Out of love and out of grace. It is the same hard truth that Rip Wheeler would come to grasp. Over the last several years, the show Yellowstone has become one of the most popular TV series in recent memory. How many of you are familiar with Yellowstone? Have seen it or familiar? I figured there was quite a few. For those of you who aren't familiar with Yellowstone, it is the saga of the Dutton family, headed by John Dutton, who is played by Kevin Costner. It is the saga of the Dutton family and the constant conflicts and enemies that they face, often in their own household and in their own mirrors. The conflicts and enemies that they constantly face in their attempt to hold on to their ranch, which is the largest in the state of Montana, as well as the way of life that comes with it and that they love so much. Having said that, and if you are familiar with it, Yellowstone is also a series that is regularly filled with a great deal of violence and immoral and unethical behavior. I still like it. I'm sorry. It is not exactly the kind of show that you would expect to find any great spiritual insight in. But you'd be surprised. Because in one of my favorite scenes from Yellowstone, we see just that. It is a scene between the character who's known as Rip Wheeler, who is the ranch foreman, and a young boy named Carter. Rip Wheeler has come to Yellowstone. He came to Yellowstone when John Dutton took him in as an adolescent after Rip had killed his father in an unsuccessful attempt to keep his father from murdering his mother, like I said. Okay. John Dutton takes Rip in and gives him a place to live, gives him a home, and takes him on as a ranch hand. And he will eventually work his way up to be the ranch foreman. Carter is an adolescent boy who has also come to Yellowstone under the same or similar circumstances. John Dutton has taken Carter in after another act of violence has taken away all of the rest of Carter's family. Carter, just like Rip, back in that time when he was an adolescent, now lives at Yellowstone, is cared for at Yellowstone, and works as a ranch hand there. In the scene, they are having a conversation while Carter is doing one of his chores. And in the midst of that chore, Carter stops, looks at Rip, and says, "I don't deserve this." Meaning, I don't deserve to have been taken in and given a home and given all of this. I don't deserve this. You didn't have to do this. And Rip Wheeler just stops for a second. And then he says back to the kid, "No one does. No one does." That's what God did for us at Christmas. But that's a hard place to get to. It's not an easy place to get to spiritually. Especially in this time, in this culture, where the constant messaging, the constant call to life perspective is one of, I deserve this. I deserve all of it. I deserve the best of all of it. And not just deserve it, I'm entitled to it. We see that. That message is hammered at us from before Thanksgiving right through the end of Christmas when it comes to gift giving. Whether it is giving gifts to others or even giving them to ourselves. We deserve it. But that really is the exact opposite of the true spirit, the real gift of Christmas. God coming to us as one of us, even though God didn't have to. We didn't deserve it. Okay, we weren't entitled to it. We weren't owed it. The hard spiritual truth is that God doesn't owe us anything. But yet, out of love and grace, we get this. We get this. The truth of Christmas is that we don't deserve it. No one does. But rather than looking at that as a demeaning way of understanding Christmas, maybe, just maybe, it is actually the key that unlocks our being able to really make the most of that gift. Anyway, just something for us to ponder.